Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Every company has a story to tell, from the small startup to the large enterprise, and everything in between. This is one of them. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And here we are. This is Sean Martin with ITSP Magazine. We are geared up for another story with our good friends at Imperva, and I'm thrilled to have one of our great friends for many years now, Kunal, joining us to have this conversation. Kunal, we're going to be spending a lot of time looking at APIs and how they run the business and what we need to do to secure them, and I'm very thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thrilled to be back and, of course, chatting with you. One thing I can just say right at the top is I was thinking about this week. This is Black Hat Week in Vegas. And
that it is.
And I remember a couple of years ago we were together, and it was a fun moment getting to hang out, and hopefully things will get back to sort of normal, whatever sort of normal means, for 2022, and we can see each other again.
Exactly. I certainly miss that. And in the meantime, we can connect through interfaces, such as audio podcasts and videos and other things, which I'm sure we're all very familiar with and overloaded with in some senses.
Well, you said interfaces, and I thought you were going to just go for it right there. Yeah,
I'm holding back a little bit. We're gonna tease this one out a bit. Before we get into it, though, Kunal, a brief intro for yourself who haven't met you yet.
So, for those listening, my name is Kunal Anand. I'm Imperva's Chief Technology Officer. I have been in security for a long, long time, back from when it was all called, I think, InfoSec. I think everybody used to call it that. I love security. I love software. I love photography. I love music. I love all sorts of fun things. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Yeah, we share a lot of those passions, and one could easily see a passion for music being shared, a passion for photography being shared. APIs? Questionable, but it's there. I have to tell you, it's there. I'm excited for this, and so we're going to look at this from two different angles, and we'll take both paths as far as we can and see where they continue to cross. APIs, application programming interfaces, I believe it is. Basically allow. I'm going to let you give a proper description, but they allow things to connect and interact with each other. Be it hardware and software. For those in engineering, they probably already have a good sense of this, but line of business owners who are responsible for delivering products and services to their customers through software probably don't know that these exist and that are part of their application. So for that audience, describe what an API is.
Sure. I think the best way to describe it may be to kind of talk about what the old world used to look like and kind of build things up to where they are right now. So if we hop in the DeLorean and go back to an era before APIs, businesses used to have lots of applications that would require communication between themselves. So you would sometimes have an application that would need to talk to another application. Could be, let's take an example, a booking system, a travel booking system. You'd have a front end. A front end would serve up an interface, so you could type in the date, the location where you want to travel to, and that front end would go ahead and talk to a back end server. And in the past, those things would kind of be built on proprietary protocols. And if you kind of speed things up a little bit over the last, I would say, 15, 20 plus years, we've seen a lot of investment in what are called APIs. APIs ultimately specify a protocol for how information or requests should be made to a underlying application. And it describes things like the format. So if it's going to be JSON or XML, the protocol itself, if it's going to be REST or SOAP or Google RPC. And we've now seen a lot of interesting tooling around APIs emerge over the last couple of decades. And I would say it's gotten really hot in the last maybe 5 years, 10 years, as more and more people are building more APIs now that are just single serving, single function. So back when you'd have large monolithic applications, maybe an application that was a million lines of code. Now you have 100 applications or 100 APIs that are maybe 10 lines of code or 100 lines of code, and it's really interesting to see the way people are going and the sort of rapid adoption of APIs over the last few years.
Yeah, and maybe if we can give a couple of examples. So I know one would be multi-platform. So if you wanted to build an application that ran on the web and ran on a mobile device and ran on a smartwatch, you might have an interface that provides connection to the services and the data,
Mm-hmm.
and then presents it on all those different platforms. Another is if you wanted to provide a specific service. Let's use authentication or login service. You might pull an API that allows you to access via your Facebook ID or your Google ID, or another service that might be a two-factor. Those are just a couple off the top of my head. What are some examples that are very common for businesses these days that either their teams automatically build or perhaps even incorporate as a third-party API?
Yeah, a great example would be almost all of us have a smartphone. And when we have applications on those phones, they're communicating back to the respective companies. Every time you fire up the Facebook app or any application in there, it's communicating back to the mothership, and it's communicating specifically to an API. And so the nomenclature can be sometimes confusing because there are APIs as a thing that you can communicate with, or an application can expose an API that you can communicate with to speak with the underlying application. Regardless, they're all just applications. And I think that's the sort of key takeaway, the big sort of aha for those that are listening in. If you're a business owner and you operate a line of business and you've always been curious because you've heard the word API being used interchangeably, think about an API as either a specification for how to talk to an application or a very specific type of application that's purely designed to collect information from someone communicating with it, or send back information from maybe a database or a data store that it's communicating with.
Yeah, I love it. And it can be super complicated if you're an engineer trying to pull all this stuff together. And we'll touch on that in a second. But from a line of business owner perspective, APIs allow you to build bigger, better, faster things for your customers than perhaps you would have been able to years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back again 20, 30 years ago, we were building applications that are now considered monoliths. And when I say monoliths, big, bulky code bases, millions and millions of lines. You'd have a lot of people working on one overall code base. And once you reach a certain size and a certain amount of complexity, it's just hard to do things with that application. Like if you wanted to add a new feature or add new functionality, it's a lot difficult to do it when you don't have a very lean and agile code base to work with. So where we see a lot of change in the last few years has been people who have had these large monoliths that are saying, there may be a better way to do this. And sometimes you hear a phrase called distributed systems or distributed computing. And ultimately what that means is having, instead of one large application where everything is happening in sort of a large, sort of very, very closed to see sort of execution environment, now you have a different environment where you've got lots of applications that are communicating with each other. Maybe they're applications and APIs that are communicating with each other. Maybe these applications have APIs themselves, but it's what has now emerged as the sort of distributed architecture that businesses now run. And the side effect of that, of course, is they're able to add new features and functionality faster. They have fewer people working on a single code base, which is great. You have teams that are just fundamentally able to get more things done, adding new features and functionality. So I think it's been a really big unlock for a lot of organizations over the last 10, 15 years or so.
Yeah, and maybe another example, if we stick with our friends at Facebook that also own Instagram and Messenger and was it WhatsApp and a few other things. Those are all integrated, and I guess what I want to pull on there is there's a lot of data inside these applications that are then exposed and transferred through these APIs. Can you give us some examples of maybe not the Facebook example, perhaps a business example of an application is built that the types of data that would be stored in the application and then exposed through an API?
Sure. If you think about it, let's take food delivery applications, the food delivery mobile apps. This is a really interesting one. With the pandemic, everybody has been, or not everybody per se, but many people have been ordering more food online, or they're going through their smartphones. I'm certainly guilty of it. But if you think about it, when you log in to the application, and again, when you download the app knows nothing about you. But when you provide your username and password and you successfully authenticate, a bunch of information comes down to your device and lives in the context of that application. That's an API call. There's one API call to authenticate your user. Then there's another API call to go and fetch your information. And that information can contain stuff like your payment information, your first name, last name, your address or addresses, your order history, which could contain lots of other sensitive information. And I think a lot of people don't realize that while APIs were created to simplify communication between systems, there's a lot of sensitive information that does go over APIs. And Sean, I actually think that this has been an area that a lot of people have been missing out on, especially when you think about it from a security perspective. We've been so hyper fixated as an industry talking about how to protect APIs, but it's usually protecting the surface of an API. But no one really has thought about taking it a step further, which is, where are all of my APIs? What's all the information going over these APIs? Is this information sensitive? And I think a lot of businesses, as you know, as I get to talk to CIOs and CISOs, they don't know where all their APIs are. B, they don't know all the information that's being accessed. And C, they don't know how much information over those APIs have actually been accessed. So there's a lot of unknowns that I think business owners and CIOs and CISOs have with respect to APIs today.
Yeah, and it's typically when we start talking about security, it boils down to visibility and asking the right questions to get the answers that grants you that visibility of what's going on there. Because in the example you gave of the food delivery, sure, it's easy to see the customer-facing system that collects personal information from customers, but there's also a B2B interface that connects all the restaurants, right?
Oh,
and there's probably even another one that connects to the financial systems of how do all the payments actually get handled between those two through the app, and then there are probably many more. So how do I guess my question is this the responsibility of business owner to say, where's all my data and how is it accessed through APIs, or is this more along the lines of an engineering developer role?
I think it's both. I think as we've seen an increase in just the number and the sort of strictness of some of these new regulations and compliance initiatives, I think it's everyone's duty in an organization to be aware of these things. I don't think we can just say it's only the job of one person, because that's proven to fail. It's proved multiple times over the last couple of decades where it's all been on the shoulders of a single human being. It just doesn't scale. It just doesn't work. And so that knowledge and that responsibility must be distributed. And I don't think we can say that developers are off the hook and they don't need to be mindful of it. No, I think developers obviously know more about their applications and APIs, and they certainly have a good understanding and inkling as they've built those things, truly where information is going. If information is encrypted at rest, is it encrypted in transit? The level of detail that they have available to them is such that you're not going to find using a tool or using, a series of static analysis or software composition analysis solutions. You're just not going to find that. And so you have to have folks, general managers, line of business owners, who are mindful about it from a compliance perspective, because that's important for the business, because that ties into an overall risk discussion. And at the same time, you need education and training. And you also need to give people the ability to say something when they see something that's wrong. I think where this often goes wrong is, usually if you go back to some of these big breaches, and I won't name names, there's usually been someone on the inside, like a developer, who's found the issue or has seen the issue before, and they've raised it, but it never got acknowledged. And I think that's why you need that alignment across the business.
Yeah. So and I presume that comes to communication and understanding. And I don't know, Kunal, I mean, it's been a while since I've built software, but the requirements of what the customer needs and then what actually gets built, and the expectations and understanding of why it works a certain way, how it might be used to work a different way than is not intended, or perhaps even maliciously used to cause harm and steal data or whatever. How do line of business owners and developers connect on that level so that they know that this is an API that has risk and could be misused, and we're actually seeing an example of where it could be compromised?
Well, I mean, you said something before, and I'll answer your question. And you said something before, and I think as an industry, we've collectively made some pretty big mistakes, because I think collectively as an industry, we've all kind of rushed to protection, right? But you said something earlier, which is so spot on, in that a lot of people don't even know or have visibility into what actually is going on right now, right? So when we think about security, a lot of people's minds go immediately to protection and blocking and being able to stop an attack. But equally, if not more important, is a real understanding of what actually is happening. And with respect to APIs, I think it's a two-way thing. So now to go back and answer your specific question, I think it's a two-way thing where I think as organizations stand up and they operate a hopefully secure software development lifecycle, certainly a software development lifecycle, they need to involve different teams to talk about things like API security risks. What are the risks when you're building APIs? Well, what do the schemas look like? Are you having the right conversations at the onset? Are the schemas that are being built, and schemas are those specifications that I was alluding to before. So for instance, going back in the context of this food order app, when you have a mobile application communicating with the backend, what do those calls look like? For instance, I make a call with a token and I get back a bunch of payment information. Well, is that payment information encrypted? How much payment information are we giving back? And so we need to have more of those upfront discussions in the development process and that architectural process. And then you kind of think about the life cycle itself. So that would be your threat modeling, architectural discussion. Then you get into development and of course, making sure that you're implementing the best practices when developing those applications or APIs. And then when you get it out into a staging or a production environment, obviously ensuring that you've got the right level of controls. I mean, Sean, we've seen a huge increase in bad bots on the web. And it's about 25% of all internet traffic is bad bots today. And guess what? Bad bots have become smarter, and they're not just going after web applications, they're now going after APIs. And when we see that level of interest or malicious actors going after something, you have to take notice and you have to do something. And so that means making sure you've got the right protections in place. So doing the right thing with key validation. And again, that's some stuff that developers can do, but that's a discussion between developers and security teams. And of course, on the operational side, bringing those teams together. And I think what I'm not seeing and what I would love to see more of is over the last 20 plus years, we've invested in really going and standing up application security. We now need to stand up API security programs in every organization today.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Kunal, if you see this a lot, because my experience over the years being involved with software development is there's usually a definition of what the organization wants built, and then there's a super smart engineering team with access to tons of tools and open source libraries and all these, and just a brain full of energy ready to build something really, really cool. Do we see things being over engineered and overbuilt in a way that introduces risk through these APIs? So where an API isn't necessary, or where an API opens up access to certain things that isn't necessary, do we see that stuff a lot still?
Yeah, you could argue that they're either over provisioned. You could argue that they're maybe bloated. But the counter would be that they're, or not the counter to that, but the other way to look at it is that they're all under secured, right? And so I think you're right. I think a lot of developers tend to bring in other libraries, outside libraries, open source things, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, as someone who builds APIs all the time, you don't need to implement a lot of basic things. If someone has already built a good library for you to get your job done, take advantage of it, right? Use it. But that introduces risk. And that's where we get into more supply chain oriented discussions. And I'm glad you brought it up, because when we talked about it earlier, APIs are just applications. And if applications bear supply chain risk, then that means APIs do too. And when you've got developers that are pulling in all sorts of open source libraries and components, the open question is, how judicious are these organizations in terms of policing these libraries and making sure that they're doing what they should be, and that you don't have API information being siphoned and sent off somewhere, like in some of the other supply chain attacks that we've seen. And so I think that's actually a really great point that you bring up. And the hope is that as businesses obviously architect, write, and scale out more APIs, that they begin to take API security more seriously than it being an afterthought.
Yeah, and I'm a huge proponent of I hate the phrase shifting left, but I think it's the only way to describe it. And so understanding what the exposure is and preparing, perhaps even mitigating, but certainly preparing for that exposure if you decide to build it in. And so let's go to the engineers. Let's give them a little love. How do they get a handle on this? How do they get that visibility that they need? Because they might be working on applications that are 3, 4, 5, 10 years old. Who knows, right? With stuff that's built in and exposed and pulling data from other services. How do they get a handle on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you just said is critical here. It's possible that the teams that are working on older APIs have no clue about the information that's being accessed. I mean, let's go back again before modern day specifications. And for those that are technical, you may, when I say these terms, you may nod your head. Things like Swagger or the Open API specification. These are terms that you're probably familiar with if you're a developer or an engineer or even a security professional. You may have heard of those terms. That's how you describe an API, how you make calls, the information that goes back and forth over APIs. But all those things are relatively new. And when I say relatively new, they didn't exist more than 10 years ago. And back then, a lot of organizations kind of just deployed APIs or microservices or services in general without crafting a lot of these specifications. So a lot of teams just don't have a lot of knowledge and a lot of visibility. Kind of goes back to the visibility discussion that we were having a moment ago. I think a lot of people don't know truly the information that's being accessed, and of course, who's accessing it and where is it going. And that's one of the things that, as we thought about the world, we've been in the API security space for several years. Sean, it was one of the things that when we took a step back last year and we're like, it's great that we've got these things around protection, but ultimately we could be doing better, and we could be helping people more by giving them more visibility into things. And I think collectively that's where you see the market going. And I think that's where you see a lot of people going right now. And these people who have these old APIs, they want to know, and they want all the help they can get, because when they get into an application or when they get into an API and they have to make a change, they're not going to read every single line of code to know everything about it. They're just going to get in, do the task, and get out. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's them being very efficient with their day. But it doesn't mean that you have full coverage. It doesn't mean you have full visibility as to what's going on. So I think it always starts with, doesn't matter if it's an older API or a newer API, let's get to a baseline. Let's establish a baseline. Let's apply some tools and techniques to go and find these APIs, find the endpoints, and find the data that's going over them. I think that's always got to be number one. And
I want to know, how do you do that? Or maybe more appropriately, how do you help your customers get what they need in that sense?
Sure. So, I mean, the way that a business would typically do it, and again, minus what we're doing on the Imperva side, but how would you typically do it today? You'd have to either go in and read all the lines of code and do some sort of composition analysis and maybe try to piece things together. That's one way to do it. The other would be you tap logs from the application or your API, response logs, so you have an understanding of the information that's going back. And then you'd have to do some sort of data classification on top of it. That's a more layered approach. The other option, kind of a derivative of that, is you grab a lot of information that's going back and forth over APIs and you put it into a SIM, and then maybe you have some analyst that is writing some certain keywords. And maybe over time, you can start to get an inclination of what's going on, so you can start to maybe go and build a specification. But doing it from scratch and doing it by hand is really error prone and just will take a lot of time. And that's why you don't see businesses doing it today. It's not worth their time to do it. So
and then the code changes tomorrow, and you have to
exactly. You said it so great. There's this thing called DevOps. People change code all the time now, and even it's not just regular organizations. Food delivery companies, they do it all the time. I was just talking to a CISO over there, and he was talking about the challenges that they have in terms of staying on top of their developers that are constantly deploying API changes. And when I asked them how frequently they see those deployments, multiple times a day, they're deploying code to production. So it's incredible, the rate of change. So
I've seen very large streaming services presentations from some of their security staff where they're literally delivering security checked and validated code multiple times an hour.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's unreal.
It's insane.
How do you have a schema and it has to be done in real time.
Yep, and so exactly that's what we ended up building. So again, going back to last year, we released a bunch of API protection capabilities. We saw a lot of great adoption for it. In my discussions with customers, I kept asking them, what are your big pain points that you see around APIs? And they all came back to me. They brought visibility. And the other thing I was able to tease out is something that we pioneered around API data tracking. But I'll get to that in a moment. Going back to what it is that we do, we basically sit in line to the requests and responses. You don't have to make any changes to your APIs. You don't have to make any changes to your applications. And what we do is that work I was describing before that you would typically do manually, we do it all automatically, and we do it all in real time, precisely as you said. And we don't sample either. We look at all of the requests and responses, and we can tell you exactly where APIs are, where those endpoints are, or what those endpoints are. We can describe them in really, really insane amounts of detail. Then we can tell you the data that's going over it, because a lot of people use metadata to describe fields. So for instance, they may say that this field is called social security number, or this field is called first name or last name, right? That's easy, right? You can run metadata classifiers. We do that. And then we also deploy things like static analysis over those API calls. And then just recently, we introduced machine learning over API requests and responses. So we can actually implement our own classifiers, which we already do, to effectively tell us, this is a credit card number, or this is a interesting account number that we see going back and forth. And we serve all that information up. We provide the anomalous things back. We also count the amount of times information has been accessed. I'll get to that in a second. And we allow people on top of all of that stuff to now generate schemas. So what's really exciting is we see people deploy us on older APIs, and they'll put us into a protection mode or a monitor mode. It's up to them, whatever they'd like. And afterwards, after maybe a day or 2 days of API usage, they feel that they've got a pretty good sample. They hit the download button and they get a nice schema on the other end that outlines in detail the API, the endpoints underneath those APIs, and the information going over them. And it's really cool. I've seen organizations leverage this just to get context as to what's going on. And now the last thing that I've teased a few times now is what we call API data tracking, because it's one thing to talk about and show you where your APIs are. It's another thing to shine a light on these APIs to do things like data discovery and data classification, which we do as well. So being able to tell you now as a organization, again, you could be a developer using us, you could be a ops person or a security person. You now have the insight that maybe you never had before that says, by the way, you've got this much PII going back and forth, or you've got X number of records that have been accessed by a particular IP address. Is this normal? And of course, we then tie it back into the core web application firewall that we built. So you can now take an action to do things like an IP block if you wanted to. And we automate a lot of that work. We make it really easy to sort of connect the API world to what we do at the edge in terms of stopping bad actors to get to those APIs and applications. But we've been really listening to the market, and that's ultimately what we do from a API perspective.
And I can imagine a lot of the engineers and I suspect even a lot of the SecOps, the operations folks, perhaps even IT, who knows if we're helping shape network traffic certain ways too. They're all probably sitting here. Thankfully, finally I can get visibility with the ability to take some action here. And so I would encourage everybody listening who's on the technical side to connect with Kunal, mainly to understand how you can help them get that visibility and then the controls and the protections in place. But I'm also thinking about, again, the line of business owner here as we begin to wrap. I mean, you mentioned microservices and services and APIs, and I mean, there's all this language, and we can't expect the line of business owner to know that they're using APIs or microservices or whatever it is that's underneath the hood, let alone what impact it might have to their business, what impact it might have to their customer experience. So how do line of business owners ask the right questions so that they can get their engineering teams up to speed on this, and so that they can get the answers they need to know that they're going to be compliant with whatever regulations they need to adhere to, and they're going to beef up and stand up their security posture in a way that protects the customer and the business?
Yeah, all great questions. And maybe to clarify for those that are listening, when we say things like microservices, or if you ever hear things like service meshes and east-west, they're all kind of pointing to the same thing, which are internal APIs. All we're talking about when we say things like a microservice or a service mesh deployment, they're just different form factors that an API could take. But for the most part, these things are effectively, and think about them effectively as internal APIs. I think the right place for business owners to start is to get an inventory of where all these APIs are. And then I think after you have that inventory list, to go back to the stakeholders who work on those APIs. So it could be a small team of developers, usually is the case with modern development and APIs, and ask them questions. What is this API used for? Who's using this API? What's the purpose of this API? Why does this API even exist, right? And so you might be able to work closely as a business owner with operations teams to get usage information around who's making these API calls, where these API calls are coming from. You could leverage a solution like Imperva to tell you the information that's going over those APIs. So now you have a good understanding that maybe you do have sensitive information. going over these particular APIs. Great. So now you've got the first few parts that inform your threat model, which would be, yes, we have sensitive information. Yes, this information is being accessed. And then it's the next step, like you would do with application security. Do you have the right controls in or around your APIs to make sure that that information is being securely accessed? So the right person is accessing the information. Going back to the food delivery use case, if I'm accessing it through my mobile application, knowing that it's me accessing it versus a bad bot that's trying to just roll through an API, credential stuffing or token stuffing to try and steal someone's information. And so I think it all starts with a conversation, Sean. I think it really just goes back to these owners asking the right questions, having a clear inventory, and really starting to assess and evaluate risk of these APIs, translating their application risk framework into an API-oriented mindset shouldn't be too difficult. I think there's some simple techniques that people can apply. But I think once you have that, you can begin to ask the right questions and always ask it not from the perspective of why does this exist, but you should be asking the questions, who's accessing and who can access this information? And that will really inform the threat model in terms of what you should be thinking about and where that information could possibly go.
Yeah, and you said another magic word earlier, context. And I always picture storytelling when we start talking about conversations between two different groups or multiple groups. And storytelling with context, and kind of doing the what if, right? It's, you know what you want it to do, but what if something isn't happening that's supposed to, or is happening that shouldn't be?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the context situations that I think really bring light to the exposure and the risk, and then ultimately the changes and controls that need to be put in place to shore things up.
Anomalies, right? It all comes down to being able to surface the anomalies. The phrase more needle, less haystack, right? It's really appropriate. And people don't have a lot of time. We were talking about this before with things like the pandemic. Obviously, we've seen a big shift and a big acceleration of people deploying more APIs now than ever before. So kind of an open question is, with the ever expanding surface area, how do you know exactly what's going on over these APIs? And you can't read every line, you can't read every event. You need to look for anomalies. You need to look for strange things. And I think being able to surface anomalies is important. And of course, being able to act on them, being able to build policies is important, and equally important. And again, I'm with you on the whole shift left thing. I think instead of saying to the developers, you got to do X, Y, and Z, I think being able to provide learning lessons or being able to provide visibility from what's actually going on in production back to the developers would be more meaningful. So again, maybe you can close the loop. Maybe you can go back to the development teams with more insight saying, listen, we see this weird, interesting pattern happening for the APIs that you built. Maybe you can go and address this. So that's the way I like to think about it, the full life cycle of protecting APIs.
Yeah, education and helping them through. And I can't help but go back to the almost seemingly impossible task of figuring all this stuff out without some tools. I mean, where would you begin, and how would you ever keep up? Perhaps if you started at the beginning and documented, but you'd probably have a second team responsible just for that. And ultimately, it has to come to tools and automation and machine learning, like you've implemented. Yeah.
I agree. We don't have enough people in the industry. Businesses don't have enough people. I was talking about this earlier with the team, chatting with a CISO at a pretty large bank, and he's lamenting that he has the same number of resources now than he did before the pandemic, and his service area has changed significantly, where he's not only on-prem, but he's also in the cloud now. And he's got more applications and APIs today than he's ever had before, but he has the same number of people doing that work. And it's unfair to assume that those people can cover the existing surface area plus the ever-growing area. So we need to find a different way to do it. And this is absolutely where technology can help. And I know when we always talk about security, and you and I have riffed on this back and forth of the fine balance and the delicate balance of situations that require the finesse of human beings to kind of make a judgment call on things. But for stuff like this, in terms of being able to aggregate, cluster, surface anomalies, we should absolutely be leaning on technology for that.
Yeah, no question. And I mean, you brought up cloud. We didn't really spend a lot of time there, but we've had some good conversations with Ron Benetton from your group there. And I mean, the cloud is a whole nother animal as well. I mean, we touched on mobile and applications and things like that, but there's the platform of the cloud that just amplifies everything. They all have services that they're exposing as well. Kunal, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. And I know we've had many conversations on the record, off the record. We'll continue to do that, and we'll do more online as we can to help get people the information they need. I mean, that's the ultimate goal here, is understand what the challenges are and find a way to overcome them. And I think hopefully line of business owners and DevOps and SecOps can all listen to this episode and come to some understanding collectively that says we have APIs. They expose information and capabilities that we need to protect, and we need to get our head wrapped around that. So hopefully they all walk away with some understanding of that and a desire to take action.
Love it. Yeah, Sean, I really appreciate you having me on. And of course, always great to reconnect with you. If people want to learn more, they can go to imperva.com, imperva.com. We've got a whole section on the site specifically around API security. If they want to dig in more on it, feel free to reach out. I'm username @KA, or just KA, two characters. I guess I'm one of the lucky ones on Twitter. Feel free to have some conversations with me there as well. And again, Sean, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, and we'll include your Twitter handle in the show notes. So perhaps you'll get some engagement there. I mean, it's a tough challenge, and I know, Kunal, you're very happy to help folks overcome some of those challenges. So again, thanks everybody for listening to this Imperva story, all about APIs. We could spend hours on it. Take the first step. Contact Kunal KA on Twitter, and happy coding. Do it safely. Thanks everybody.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and the story made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.